Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us online if you are doing so. This final class in this series, four-part series on the book of Ruth. Today, we're going to talk about being in the right place at the right time. Michael pointed out that the right place for this class next week is going to be room 100. This class is moving to room 100, which is the first classroom to your left as you come in the doors there. That class there will be moving upstairs. So this class that Kevin will be teaching again next week, beginning 1 Timothy chapter 2, this class will be moving to room 100. Fosters better discussion, better interaction with you. So next Sunday, this class will not be in here. It will be in room 100. Being in the right place at the right time. That's a common phrase in our society. It usually means that someone has had fortune or luck visit them, and it's improved their circumstances, or it's something has come that is they were just happened to be in the right place. Some say the story of Ruth is being about being in the right place at the right time, and Naomi was. In the end, is in the right place at the right time. But in a biblical context, though, it is about God being in control of the circumstances and God carrying out His will through others. The right place is where God leads us to be. The right place here is where God leads Ruth and Naomi and Boaz to be. Is there any doubt that God is at work in the story of Ruth? I mean, what if there had been no famine? There had been no reason for them to leave Bethlehem. Elimelech and his family, Naomi and his sons, Mahlon and Chilion. There had been no need for them to go to the land of Moab if there had been no famine. What if Elimelech had not died? If Elimelech had not died, when they did come back, there wouldn't be this need, as we'll see today, for his property to be redeemed, for his estate to be protected, in other words. What if Naomi's sons had not died? Then the estate would have passed to first the oldest son, and again, there wouldn't be this need for this redemption that will take place. What if Naomi's sons had already been married when they went to Moab, or if they refused to marry outside of Israel? The Israelites were precluded from marrying certain foreigners. Those from Moab, at first, they weren't really prevented, but it was not looked upon favorably in society. But in some foreign lands, they were prohibited from marrying anyone from that country. So what if they refused to marry outside of Israel? And they hadn't married Ruth and Orpah. What if Naomi's daughters, her daughters-in-law, had not been so supportive? The Bible's filled with instances of in-laws and not getting along. Genesis chapter 27, Rebekah told Isaac that she was disgusted with all these Hittite women around. If Jacob takes a wife from the Hittites, then my life won't be worth living. In Genesis chapter 28, Esau married a Canaanite woman because he knew that his father was very disapproving of him marrying a Canaanite woman, so he did it to spite his father. What if Ruth had stayed in Moab? Naomi told Ruth and Orpah to stay here. I'm going to go back to Bethlehem, but you stay here. I don't have any more sons. Your sons, or my sons, your husbands have died. I can't provide you any further men to marry. You need to stay here and marry within your own people. So what if Ruth said, okay, I'll stay here? What if they had not returned during the barley harvest? That's when Boaz was harvesting his field, and that's when a big part of this story takes place. It's during the barley harvest, and Boaz is one of his fields is being harvested, and that's where Ruth goes to glean from the field. What if it had been in another time of the year when the harvest was not going on? What if Ruth had not chosen Boaz's field? It's pretty clear that Ruth essentially picked a field to glean in at random, and it just so happened that she chose Boaz's field, and Boaz just so happened was one of the kinsmen or guardian redeemers in Elimelech's family, as we'll see later. What if Boaz had not treated her so nicely? That was the custom. Naomi told Ruth to be careful. Boaz told Ruth to be careful. There's several instances where it's not only it's directly and indirectly implied that it's very dangerous for a foreigner, and especially a woman, to be in the harvest field with the men who are harvesting the crop. What if Boaz had not treated her so nicely? Not only did he provide for her safety, he provided for her to have a noontime meal. He let her drink out of the water for the harvesters, gave her extra grain at the end of the day, told the harvesters to leave a little bit extra behind so she can get it. What if he had not been so supportive? What if Ruth had been harmed in the field? Very real possibility. What if it had happened? She'd been in the wrong field. She hadn't been in the right place at the right time. What if the original kinsman redeemer had decided to redeem the property? We'll see here in a few minutes that Boaz tells the first in line to redeem Elimelech's property, and he at first says, yes, I'll redeem it, but when he finds out he has to marry Ruth to go along with it, he backs out, and then Boaz redeems the property. But what if the original kinsman redeemer had decided, he's not named, we don't know who it is, but what if he had been the one to redeem it? You could go and play this what if continually. But God places the right person in the right place at the right time. It happens again and again and again in Scripture. There's a man named Mordecai, and he adopted his uncle's daughter, a woman named Hadassah. And he took on the role as a father. Hadassah was given the name Esther. And she was taken with a group of other women to the palace of King Xerxes, because King Xerxes was looking for a replacement for Queen Vashti, who had essentially been deposed by the king. Mordecai taught Esther to conduct herself with self-confidence and sophistication, but also in keeping with the laws for those that were still holding to the law of Israel, law of Moses. And eventually, as the story goes, we know that she eventually was chosen and she became queen. She was Queen Esther. And all the Jews that were in captivity, she was one of them. But she kept this from the king. The king didn't know she was Jewish. There was a evil brewing, though, kind of in the shadows of this. There was a man named Haman, and he had been appointed to the highest position in the kingdom other than the king. But Mordecai refused to bow down to him. Mordecai refused to serve him. He was such that he required the people to bow down to him. But Mordecai wouldn't do it, and it made him angry. So he hatched a plot to kill Mordecai. And not only did he want to kill Mordecai, he wanted to kill the whole Jewish people that were in captivity in King Xerxes' kingdom. And the king gave Haman the authority to do this because he had no idea this was going on. He had no idea of the plot. Haman had built a gallows, or depending on your translation, he built a gallows or a sharpened pole to impale Mordecai on. He was going to kill Mordecai and kill the rest of the Jews. So a resolution was issued that, and the resolution or the law could not be revoked. Once the king had issued a law, it couldn't be revoked. So he issued a law that said, on this particular day, all the Jews will be destroyed. You'll kill all the Jews in the kingdom. Well, Mordecai learned of this plan, and he sat outside the king's gate, and he wore sackcloth and ashes. He was in deep mourning because of this plan, this conspiracy. And he asked to see Queen Esther, and Queen Esther came to see him, and he asked her to tell the king what's going on. This plan, this evil plan is out there, and the Jews are going to be destroyed. You need to tell him about this. And Esther was at first reluctant. She was not only concerned about what would happen in doing so, she was also concerned about Mordecai and the rest of the Jewish people. But she was concerned about approaching the king. No one could approach the king unless the king allowed them to approach. If you approached the king without permission, you would be executed. King had to offer his scepter, and that was his permission for you to see him. But if you just went in to see the king, that was not permitted. You'd be executed for that. So she had that in the back of her mind, and she was concerned about this. And Esther's words and concerns were communicated back to Mordecai, and he, in Esther chapter 4, he said, "Do not think because you're in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows? Who knows but that you may have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Esther revealed this plot to the king, had a banquet, and this evil plot became known to the king, and Haman is the one that was actually executed, the man who had devised this plan. Mordecai in the past had revealed a conspiracy to assassinate the king, and it got to the king, and the king was able to stop it, but nothing was ever done to reward Mordecai for this. So one night the king was having trouble sleeping, so he had the royal history brought and read to him, and he found out that Mordecai had done this. He had exposed a conspiracy to save the king. And so he wanted to reward Mordecai, so he told Haman basically to run in front of the king's horses, and Mordecai would be dressed in royal robes and proclaimed that this is a man that the king wants to honor, which made Haman even angrier. And then at the banquet it was revealed that Queen Esther had given, it was revealed that Haman had this plot. And Haman was the one that was executed on the very poles or gallows that he had prepared. He went home humiliated and eventually was executed. But this plan was in place to execute, kill, annihilate the Jews in the kingdom. Queen Esther herself being a Jew that she kept secret from the king. And then Mordecai goes to Esther and said, "Maybe you've been put here for this very purpose. Maybe it's up to you, Queen Esther, to be here to save our people. Queen Esther was in the right place at the right time. God places people in the right place at the right time. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Chapter 3 of our study, part 3 of our study, which was basically chapter 3, it kind of ended with a bit of suspense. There was this odd courtship. Ruth essentially proposed marriage to Boaz. She went to the threshing floor in the middle of the night, and she uncovers his, Boaz is down at the end of the grain pile and he's sleeping, and she uncovers his feet and lays down at his feet. And that was essentially a proposal of marriage, if you will. But Boaz drops a bombshell. He says, Ruth asked him to redeem her and Elimelech's property, but he drops a bombshell and says, I'm not the next one in line. There's someone, a closer relative than me. We don't know who it is. He's never named, but he's a closer relative in the redemption order. And so this unnamed relative who has the first right to redeem the property, and in doing so, he would have to marry Ruth. Boaz says, well, I can't redeem. It's not right for me to redeem because I'm not next in line, but I will find out who's next in line if they really want to redeem this property. So chapter 4 brings us to this divine purpose that's going to take place in all this. Tells Ruth at the end of chapter 3, just be patient, wait. He's not going to rest until he has solved this matter, or this matter has been ended. And so that's where we left last week. The 4th chapter kind of is a combination of this redemption of property, and it appears the custom at the time, although it wasn't specifically in the laws, it appeared that the custom at the time was, if you're redeeming the property, if there was a woman involved, a widow, then you married and redeemed and married into that heirship marriage. So that's apparently what the custom was. Not only did you redeem the property, but if there was a widow, or in this case a daughter-in-law, then you married to continue on the lineage. So chapter 4. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down just as the guardian redeemer, or kinsman redeemer he had mentioned, came along. Boaz said, come over here, my friend, and sit down. So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, sit here, and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling a piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so I will know, for no one has the right to do it except you, and I'm next in line. I will redeem it, he said. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, you will acquire Ruth the Moabite, and then the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the guardian redeemer said, I cannot redeem it then, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself, and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today are you your witnesses that I have bought Naomi from the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. And I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife. This is in order to maintain the name of the dead and his property, so that his name will not disappear from his family or from his hometown. Today you are the witnesses." Then the elders and all the people of the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. And may you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Be famous through all the offspring that the Lord gives you and by this young woman. And may your family be like that of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he loved her, the Lord enabled her to conceive. She gave birth to a son. And the woman said to Naomi, "Praise be the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. And the women living there said, "Naomi now has a son." And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz, the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David. So first of all, to set the scene, it says Boaz goes up to the town gate. That's according to the NIV. At first glance, it just seems to be a throwaway phrase, a simple phrase, but it's a little bit more detailed and possibly means a lot more than just a simple phrase. It could simply mean that it's just a physical location, that the threshing floor was at a lower elevation than the city gate. He went up to the city gate. Rather than a geographic reference, though, it probably means more than that. If you think about it, the threshing would probably be done at a highest place they could, because you depended on the wind. When they threshed, they would throw the grain up in the air, and the chaff would blow away, and the grain would fall to the ground because it was heavier. So if it was a geographic reference, it probably wouldn't be the best place to do your threshing, because that's not the highest place, highest elevation. More than likely, though, it's a reference to the high authority that is given to the elders and the magistrates that assembled at the city gate. The words "go up to" is a phrase used quite a bit in Scripture, and it's always referred to as going to a place of honor, if you will. The Bible speaks of going up to Jerusalem. Even if they weren't going up to Jerusalem, the Bible still describes it as going up to Jerusalem. A couple of other examples in Haggai says, "Go up to the mountains, bring wood, and rebuild the temple, that I may be pleased with it and glorified." Micah chapter 4, "Many nations will come and say, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord and to the house of Jacob, that he may teach us about his ways and we walk in his paths." In Exodus, Moses going up to the mountain. It was more than just a phrase describing Moses climbing up a mountain. He was going up to a holy place, a special place, a place of honor. So there appears to be that significance in the phrase "going up to." This is a place where the honorable people of the city gathered. And it was also where the transaction took place. That's where the city business was conducted. That's where business transactions took place. It's probably equivalent to our modern city hall. Now, the purpose of Boaz's appearance there is to fulfill his promise to Ruth. He told Ruth, he said, I'll get to the bottom of this. I'll find out. So he's there, and he's waiting for the first in line, this kinsman redeemer, or some versions guardian redeemer, this redeemer to come to the city gate. He didn't waste any time. Looks like he went directly from the threshing floor where he had had his interaction with Ruth to the city gate. But this was where very important assemblies occurred. He knew that he would pass by that way, so Boaz strategically placed himself there. So he took 10 of the elders with him. There may not be anything special about the number 10. It was understood to be a perfect number, but it wasn't. There's no indication there was any special number in the number 10. But he took 10 elders with him. Could have been that was the quorum of those that were in attendance. In later times, you had to have a quorum of 10 Jews to erect a synagogue in a city. So maybe there was some type of custom there or tradition. But it does tell us that Boaz was a man of high regard. He had a high standing in the community. He was well regarded. And the fact that he could call together 10 elders and they come, then that tells you that he has some influence and he's highly regarded. You know, if he had been a scoundrel, if he had been someone who was not highly regarded in the community, then they probably wouldn't have come. If Boaz was not the man of standing, the man of valor, as is translated, if he had not been that man, then they probably wouldn't have come. Now, also in verse 3, this is the first time that a piece of land that belonged to Elimelech and would have passed to his sons, but now is basically held by Naomi. This is the first time it's mentioned. This is the first time there's been any type of agricultural land mentioned that belonged to Naomi. Essentially it was a share of the field that Elimelech owned, but Naomi legally could not own it. So when Elimelech died, it would have passed to the oldest son, Mahlon, and then the younger son, but both sons were dead, so Naomi is essentially holding this property, but she can't keep it. She can't own it. So the Redeemer has to come redeem it to preserve the family line because the property could not transfer between clans under the law. And we do know that Naomi had all kinds of sorrow and pain and struggle. And we do know that whatever famine-induced struggle that caused them to leave, after 10 years, she comes back. Now, we don't know if they had already sold the land. The land could be sold, but it had to be returned to its rightful owner in the year of Jubilee. So basically, you could transfer land, but it was almost like a lease to own. And maybe even Elimelech had been compelled to mortgage this parcel of land during the famine, and then they went to Moab. But even if you sold land in the year of Jubilee, after 50 years, it had to return to its former owner. So essentially, you were basically selling the crops. You had to calculate the value by the number of crops that would be harvested, and that was the price that would be paid, but it had to go back to the initial owner in the year of Jubilee. It could not pass to another clan or another family. So it was the responsibility of this kinsman redeemer then to redeem the property and restore it to the original family line. The law of Moses allowed a woman to request this redemption, and that's what was taking place. I think we pointed out last week an example of this was in 1 Kings chapter 21. King Ahab, there was a vineyard that King Ahab wanted, and it was owned by a man named Naboth, and he would not sell it. He says, I can't do that because I can't give you the inheritance from my ancestors. He was right. In the law, he couldn't do that. Unfortunately for him, King Ahab and his wife Jezebel were very bad people, very evil people, and they devised a scheme and had Naboth killed and then seized the property and took it. But that's not the way the law prescribed property to be handled. So Naomi's poverty probably forced this. She was probably looking to sell the land because of her poverty. And in verse 4, these circumstances, Boaz brought to the attention of the closer relative. I thought it was interesting. The literal translation of that is, I will uncover your ear. In other words, I need to tell you something. This is pretty important. And after this unnamed redeemer declares his intention to redeem it, Boaz says, well, there's a catch. There's a woman named Ruth that comes along with it, and you have to marry her. And even though some scholars are uncertain, this appears to be, as we mentioned, the popular custom at the time that the redemption of property and heirship marriage were kind of combined. If a man died under the law, his brother was to marry the widow and have children so that the name would continue. It looks like they've combined the redemption of property, real property, and heirship marriage into one. So not only do you have to redeem the property, you've got to marry Ruth here because her husband has died and she has no children. So the idea that he has to marry Ruth is not acceptable to him. So essentially he says, well, never mind, I can't do it. It probably means that he was not a very wealthy man. Probably meant that he didn't have unlimited resources. When he said it would endanger his estate, he didn't need another heir, a line of heirs there. So he said, I can't do it. And so Boaz says, all right, good. I'll do it then. I'll redeem it. And here, I want everybody to witness this. That's the purpose for all the witnesses. So everything is above board. I mean, we do the same thing today. We have witnesses that witness signatures and witness transactions, and it's nothing new. And they agree, and Boaz summarizes the agreement in front of everybody, and everybody agrees, and they seal this deal with the giving of a sandal, which was the custom. And probably once the deal was over and everybody agreed, he probably gave the sandal back to him. But anyway, that's how they sealed the deal. And then it's in verses, let's see, it's verse 12. when they ask for these blessings to be upon Boaz and Ruth. May you be like Rachel and Leah. But then they mention, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. At first, that appears to be kind of odd, because Judah's actions in producing Perez was somewhat shameful and scandalous. Tamar was a prostitute, and the way Judah acted was very inappropriate. But they're saying, we hope you're blessed as they were. Again, God uses the situation to carry out His purposes, not according to what human beings think should or would occur. Tamar, the irony of it, Tamar was a foreign woman. She was a Canaanite, non-Israelite, just like Ruth. Yet here, this lineage continues through a non-Jewish woman, because it tells us at the end of the chapter, it tells us what the family line was. Broke it down from Perez all the way to David. Even though he was conceived in a shameful way. His mother was a prostitute. It's interesting that both Tamar and Ruth are mentioned in the genealogy here, the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And so we have the marriage, and there's one very short verse, but one big solution. Boaz took Ruth to become his wife. She conceived and gave birth to a son. Notice the women in their change. When Naomi first came back to Bethlehem, remember what they said? Can this be Naomi? Naomi, who's translated as pleasant, has come back, and Naomi says, I'm no longer pleasant, I'm bitter, I'm Mara. And the women see her and say, can this be Naomi? But it's come full circle. Verse 16, now they're praising her. The women living there said, Naomi has a son. If you back up into verse 15, he will renew your life and sustain you in your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you better than 7 sons has given birth. So they go from, is this Naomi, to now, oh, you're blessed. Look, you have a son now. Even though it's a grandson, it's a son. And what a change in Naomi's outlook, the women's outlook, everyone's outlook. And what an astounding assertion to say that Ruth has been better to her than 7 sons. Ruth at any time could have just left, given up. She could have stayed. When they got back, she could have left. Naomi told her, you can leave. I can't provide you with someone else to marry. Go find someone to marry. But the author, many believe Samuel, has taken us from the point where Naomi was bereaved and her 2 sons are dead to this new child, this grandson. Naomi was finally part of a family again. And it was a loving and fulfilling role that she had to play. And the narrative almost switches back to Naomi. If you remember, we first started, the focus was on Naomi. Then the focus became Ruth. Then the focus became Boaz. Now it focuses, then it was Boaz and Ruth together, and now it's back to Naomi. The last part of the chapter is about Naomi. Naomi took the child. Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. So now we know that Naomi has come full circle. The psalmist in Psalms 126, verse 5 wrote, "Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy, and those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy." Well, Naomi's weeping had turned to joy once again. The closing genealogy kind of shifts the focus back to Boaz. Kind of fulfills a larger purpose in this narrative. This is basically how it all fits together. But the true story of the book of Ruth, the conclusion is that God's purposes has been and will continue to be accomplished through whatever individual or whatever circumstance that He so chooses. Could be the lives of very ordinary, faithful individuals. Could be someone extraordinary, but it could be someone very ordinary. From a human standpoint, we would expect something more glamorous. We would expect someone other than Ruth to be in the line here, the lineage of the Messiah. From a human standpoint, we would expect this to be more of a story of within the Jewish people, within the Jewish race. But there is this woman who is not a Jew, is part of this direct lineage of the Messiah. It is the marriage union of a Jew and a Gentile, Boaz and Ruth, that is part of a lineage that produces the Messiah that goes to the cross, whose death and blood then creates a union of Jew and Gentile through the blood on the cross. In a real sense, though, Naomi, Ruth, Boaz, Elimelech, none of them are the true character or the true point of the book of Ruth. None of them are the central character. It's God. God, the book of Ruth is about God and His plan to redeem His people. And in this instance, His plan goes from Ruth to His planned redemption to the Redeemer. And how is that possible? Well, if you look at Matthew chapter 1, Luke chapter 3, Matthew traces the genealogy forward, Luke traces it backward, but they both end up in the same place, essentially. From Adam, the Son of God, and you go through all these different heirs, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David, King Solomon, all the way up to Joseph, to Jesus, the Son of God. Adam is declared the Son of God. Jesus is declared the Son of God. But it's all in this lineage. And the book of Ruth is about God and His plan and His redemption. Not about famines and grief and overcoming this grief and hardship. It's about God. We'll end it there. Again, next week, this class is moving to room 100 back there. Kevin will be in 1 Timothy chapter 2. So don't forget that, and it's been a pleasure for the last month to be here. Thank you.